And welcome back to the Financially Simple Podcast. I'm your host, Justin Goodbread, and man, we are still dealing with this coronavirus. We're dealing with it now on a global stage. In fact, every time you turn the media on, it seems like something new is happening. The other day, though, I read an article. Now, those of you who know me, you realize I do not watch TV. That's not where I spend my time. But I read this article that said estimates that 100,000 to 200,000 Americans could die from the coronavirus. And I got to tell you, when I read that for the first time, I thought it was a misprint. I really did. I started scratching my head, saying, Lord, please say no. There can't be that many people who die. And then I started watching the trends on a global scale. And I started looking at some things. And so I want to take a little moment here today and talk about perspective. Talk about perspective in the sense of what is it how should we be thinking as Americans? Candidly, how should we be thinking as dads, as husbands, as citizens? How should we be thinking as business owners? Because I know there's a ton of business owners who listen to us, listen to the podcast. Perhaps even you're not a business owner. How should you be thinking as an employee? I started looking into history, and I wanted to read a particular quote, a particular statement. So ahead of the attacks on the cities during World War II, the British government used three different type of posters to display around to provide morale and to mentally prepare people for what was about to happen. One of the posters said, "Keep calm and carry on." Keep calm and carry on. Now, by no means am I comparing, by no means am I comparing the World War II to what we're dealing with here today. By no means. I cannot imagine either one of these events trying to be a comparison, but I do want to add a little bit of perspective. You know, I was riding the tractor the other day, and as I was on the tractor, I was singing to myself, "Don't worry, be happy." The old song, right? You know, here's a little song I wrote. I'm not going to sing because I sound like a dying goat when I start singing, but I was singing this song, and inside the lyrics of the song, there's actually a verse that says, "Things could always be better, but things could always be worse." So with that as a backdrop, I want to introduce my very special guest today. Scott Cagle is joining me. Now, let me tell you about Scott. First of all, he's a friend. Second of all, he's my pastor. You're like, Justin, come on now. We're not going to have Sunday school here. No, we're not going to have church on podcast. But I wanted Scott, who's the pastor at North Star Church here in Knoxville, I wanted to get his perspective on what we're dealing with. He said, well, why, Justin? Well, first of all, I love his wisdom. I love his demeanor. Let me also say that if you know a pastor, then you realize that pastors deal with so much heartache in life. They're there at funerals. They're there when the baby dies unexpectedly. They're there whenever your son goes to prison. They're there through some very hard times in life. And every pastor that I've ever met has this heart that is sincerely one of empathy, one of love. But not only did I want to hear that heart from Scott, I also want to outline the fact that he is not necessarily a business owner, but he's a leader in the sense that he does have a team that works directly underneath him as his reports that are employed by the church. But he also is on a weekly basis through his own life, sharing perspective to those who are at various journeys in life. So with that, Scott, man, I am honored that you would take a little bit of time here today to join me on the podcast.
Hey, man, Justin, my privilege, man. I'm looking forward to this time just to hang out with you and share a little bit of my heart with you. And, I think our mantra so far at North Star has been prepare for the worst, but plan and hope for the best. And so I think that's the deal. We've got to be prepared for what could come, but we're very hopeful at the same time.
You know, it's interesting you say that. Now, you and I didn't talk about this in the pre-notes, but one of my mottos whenever we're doing planning for business owners and for clients is plan for the worst, hope for the best.
Right.
We say that in our initial meetings. So let me ask you, Scott, let's start at the leadership position that you're dealing with in your own church or with your team. I don't use the word staff because I think staff's an infection and infections are bad these days. So let's talk about the team. How are you communicating hope, maybe in perspective, reality to your team during this time?
Well, Justin, we're talking a lot about the cyclical nature of life. I mean, to us, this is a brand new deal. I mean, none of us have lived in these days. We're really rewriting history, or writing history, should I say, for the very first time in our lifetime. You've got people in America that have experienced and around the world, World War I, World War II, Vietnam, all these crises, 2011. And so we understand fully that this is a big time crisis in the lives of many, many people, but it's not a brand new thing. And so we're looking at great wisdom like King Solomon, who not only was one of the wisest people that ever walked on the planet, but the Bible says that he was actually one of the wealthiest people who ever lived and existed. And so here's his story in the end of his life. He's an old man now. He's white-headed like me. He said, look, I've been around the block. I've experienced a few things in this journey of life. And here's what I've discovered. There's nothing new under the sun. He talks about this so vividly, said the sun rises, it sets, the wind blows to the north and into the south. It says all the rivers run into the ocean, but the ocean is never full. And so he just talks about the cyclical nature of life and that there's nothing new that we could ever experience. So we're talking about these things as we look into history. I shared this story this past weekend of the spring of 250 AD in the city of Rome, where we have what we thought was the foundations of the origins of the Ebola virus, where thousands of people were dying in Rome every day, and thousands of others were flooding out of the city of Rome. But at the same time, there was a bishop of the city of Carthage named Cyprian. And so Cyprian gathers a lot of like-minded people who say, hey, man, everybody's rushing out of the city. Who's rushing in? So they were rushing into the city just to meet the needs of people and care for people. And, over time, the Ebola virus, it fades and life goes back to normal. You can fast forward into the 1500s in Germany. So what happens in Germany was the bubonic plague. We've all heard about this, read about it in history books, where what is amazing to me, Justin, I was just finding out as I was reading about the bubonic plague, is that a person could have no symptoms at all. 24 hours later, they're burying them. And so they get this fever, and then all of a sudden they get delirious and boils pop out on the body, and then it goes into their bloodstream, and 24 hours they're dying. So literally hundreds of thousands of people were dying in Germany of the bubonic plague. And there was a man there that we all know the name Martin Luther. And so Martin Luther, he's a monk and he's a theologian and he's a professor of theology. He's a great man, and his wife. And so they decide, hey, we're going to stay. So Martin Luther and Katrina, when everybody is just flooding out of Germany, they're saying, hey, we're going to stay because somebody needs to stay and care for broken people. And so I think it's something that we know is, this thing is, it's incredible. It's once of a lifetime for us, but it's not something that hasn't happened in history. And, the coronavirus has swept across the world, swept into our nation, and one day it'll be over. And so I think just trying to remind people that nothing is forever except heaven. And so that we're going to endure this. We're going to walk through this. And so just talking about the sovereignty of the Creator, talking about the cyclical nature of life, because everything does come back around eventually, like jeans, right? So, I remember when I was a kid, everybody had bell-bottom jeans, and then bell-bottoms went out, and then it went to the straight leg. And so then after the straight leg were skinny jeans, but that's a whole nother deal. I don't think anybody should wear skinny jeans, by the way. And then it went back to the boot cut. Then it went back to bell-bottoms. Now we're back at straight legs again. So, everything in life is cyclical, and we just need to be faithful and not fearful. And that's our deal. We're going to prepare for the very worst. We're going to hope for the very best. And this thing it'll pass.
I love the fact that you start off with Solomon. The listeners of the long-term listeners of the podcast know that I read 5 books every year. Every year I read these same 5 books. The Richest Man in Babylon, Think and Grow Rich, Dave Ramsey's Total Money Makeover, Robert Kiyosaki's The Millionaire Next Door, and I read Proverbs and Ecclesiastes. And I think it's interesting you start off with Solomon. I grabbed this book off my bookshelf. I'm going to try to hold this up to the camera, friends. The Richest Man That Ever Lived by Stephen Scott. It's an unbelievable book, and it talks about Solomon. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's Ecclesiastes where it starts talking about everything. There's a season, a time, et cetera, et cetera. And then I think it was the Birds who actually turned that into a song. Is that correct? Was it the Birds?
It may be, yeah. For every season, turn. So, yeah, Ecclesiastes 3, he starts this big, long list. He says there's a time to be born, a time to die, there's a time to mourn, a time to dance, a time to plant, a time to harvest. And so, and he ends it up. It's kind of interesting. I love that. It's a great lead in for me as somebody who studies Scripture. And so in verse 11, he says, and he, talking about the Creator of the universe, makes everything perfect or beautiful in its time, and not our time, but his time. But then the verse following that is so intriguing. So in Ecclesiastes 3:13, he says this, I have discovered something. This is what he says. I'm an old man, I'm looking back, I have discovered something, that there's nothing more for man than to eat and to drink and enjoy the labor of our hands. So find something that you're good at, find something that you're gifted at, find something that brings you satisfaction, and then do it with the best of your ability. And he says, this is the gift of God. So, and it makes it pretty simple, doesn't it? He says, I've seen it all, been there, got the t-shirt, experienced a lot of things, but I've discovered the true meaning of life really is just to eat good food and to drink whatever you choose to drink, and then to enjoy the toil or the labor of your hands, because this is why God has gifted you in this time. So interesting storyline.
Well, let me ask you this, Scott. I was on the phone this morning with several business owners who candidly want to work, but they can't. They're shut down now for probably another 6 to 8 weeks. And they're sitting here looking at this thing saying, holy cow. Perhaps they could have done some things beforehand differently, you know, water underneath the bridge at this point. They are now facing this reality that they may not have a business to go back to. While simultaneously, we have many, many, many people around the world who are sitting here saying, holy cow, how in the world can I add perspective, or can I look at this when there's so much ugliness, there's so much hopelessness around me? How is it that they can gain some perspective whenever everything seems lost?
Right.
To say, man, what's that one thing, Scott, that I can look for to give me some perspective? I guess this is my question.
Yeah, I mean, this might sound crazy, but in these days, I think it's more important for us to reach out to care for, and to encourage other people. We've got a little saying right now among our leadership and among the parishioners of the body in which I lead, and it's this. It's just being very practical. It says, wash your hands, and then wash somebody else's feet. Wash your hands. I mean, do everything you can to be proactive to protect yourself, social distancing. All those kind of things, but just caring for yourself. Wash your hands, but then wash somebody else's feet. It seems like to me, Justin, I've discovered in life that there's always somebody who has a little bit worse than me. And it is about a perspective, isn't it? You know, I go all the way back to my college days. I was a college football player, and my coach happened to be a believer. And so he always had us doing ministry projects in the cities around us. And so one of the things he would always do when an athlete on the team got injured, he would load them up and take them to the Knoxville Children's Hospital, into the area where little children were battling with cancer, just to go in, play games with these kids, work a puzzle book, laugh with them a little bit. And it's amazing how rapidly their perspective changed. They go, oh my goodness, man, my football career is over. I blew out my knee. And they were feeling sorry for themselves and struggling. Just, what am I going to do now? What am I going to do next? But when you see a little 3 or 4-year-old kid that's battling with leukemia, and you may not make it out of the hospital alive, and you can sit down and bring a little bit of love and joy and laughter into their life, it changes your perspective rapidly. And so just to maybe look out for those around you and begin to serve people, even out of your own confusion and your own fear, it dramatically changes things.
Scott, one of the questions I've been asking every guest on the podcast for the last probably 3 weeks is this, and it's a pretty hard question. So I'm gonna ask you the question and give you talk for a second and let you think about it. The question is this: it is, if you had one and only one pearl of wisdom to give, just one pearl of wisdom to give, and that was your last breath that you could give out today to business owners, Americans, families, fathers, husbands, etc., what would it be? That's my one question. And knowing that that's a tough question, the reason why I've been asking that question is because I'm hearing a common thread. Now, you know that I'm in the money world. My job is to help business owners double their net worth every 3 to 5 years. That's my job. We have advisors here that do all sorts of funny things, but I'm noticing that whenever life happens, money it's just fleeting. It's just a bunch of junk when you really look at it. So I've been interesting to hear every guest opinion on that one question. And I want to see, I think I know you well enough to know what you're going to say, but I'm hearing the same thread throughout the message. So let me ask the question again. If you had one statement, just one that you could give as a pearl of wisdom to anybody who could hear you at this particular point with the circumstances that we're facing in our country today and our families today, no matter where they are, what would that be?
You know, Justin, it comes to me pretty quickly that we were just created for relationship. I really believe that we were created to have a relationship with the God who made us. And so that would be my first initial message, to say, seek out the heart of your creator and know him personally, not just know about him. I say this a lot, I'm fearful that a lot of people are going to miss heaven by 18 inches. What in the world are you talking about? What's the distance between your head and your heart on average? And, it's not enough just to know about God. We have to know him in our heart, in relationship through his son, Jesus Christ. So, man, I'm not here to preach today, but man, you're going to give me one opportunity to share the most important message of the world. That's going to be it. And right here we are, just, a couple of weeks away from Easter Sunday, where worldwide we celebrate the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. He's the one that makes all this possible. And so I would just say it's just be in relationship with the God who made you, but then also that we're created for relationship with each other. We're discovering this right now in this whole time of social distancing, and when we're quarantined inside our homes and people just get lonely. It's amazing that we were people who were made to be together. We were made to have fellowship and commune with one another. When you put a man or a woman in solitary confinement for long enough, most of the time they lose their mental faculties. There was a great English poet by the name of John Donne, who made this famous statement that no man is an island. We're not created to live alone. And so, gosh, I think my message to everybody who's fearful, anxious, struggling, worrying today, just know that there's a God who created you to have a relationship with him. And then he also created you to have a relationship with those around you. And so that would be, I guess, my pointed message today. It would be the crux of it all.
Man, I love that message. And just so you know, friends, Scott and I, like I said, we talked about this before the show, but I truly realize that I have some very good friends who have various different types of religions. I realize that I have friends who are listening to the podcast that are Hinduistic and Buddhist, and I have some Muslim friends. I have friends of every denomination that's underneath the umbrella Christendom. I get that. And I realize that the God that we all identify with, he has many different names. I get that. And I certainly want to be a respecter of that. So does Scott. Well, this is by no means is a point to try to indoctrinate. But I do think that one of the things I've heard consistently, even from an atheist, is this, that whenever we approach a season of doubt, a season of turmoil, we all look outside of ourselves for help. We all look to something. I've heard Creator, I've heard Jehovah, I've heard God, I've heard all sorts of names for this individual that we all look toward. And so, Scott, man, I love that simple message that it's more than ourselves. It's more than ourselves. It's about serving others. It's about realizing that our Creator God is still in control. As we wrap this particular moment up, and I know this time flies by so fast, it always does.
Right.
Scott, if there was one question that I should ask you that I haven't asked you, just one question that I should ask you, I know it's got to be about fishing or hunting or anything, but no, seriously, if there was one question that I should ask you that I haven't asked you, what would that be?
I guess, Justin, is right now all of us feel very much out of control. And the question is, who is in control? And so I think the government is trying their best to mandate and regulate some things. The medical world's trying to mandate and regulate some things. We're looking at worldwide trying to figure out scientifically how to battle with this thing. But here's the end of the deal, that we all know that there's a sovereign creator that's sovereign. He's in charge. He's in control. He saw it all coming. He knows not only the beginnings of it, but the ending of it. And at the same time, we have to realize that none of us are going to live forever. I mean, no man has ever been able to live forever beside the Lord Jesus himself. And so no man's going to live forever. The Bible even says it's appointed unto a man once to die and then judgment. So I think we have to understand that none of us are going to live forever. Isn't it interesting that the coronavirus is no respecter of persons? We've got royalty, we've got famous athletes, we've got wealthy, people that are unknown in the backside of the Amazon River or the bush of Africa. So it's no respecter of persons, and all of us are going to die one day. And so I think if I could just take a minute to share a little story that might make sense from my childhood. When I was a little boy, my dad, every Christmas season, would get my brother and I all bundled up and take us to the local town Christmas parade. And we'd line up on each side of the street, so excited because we knew all the floats were coming by. The band would be playing, they're throwing candy out to kids, and we'd all jump out and grab candy. And but in those days, being a child, I couldn't see except for the tunnel right in front of me. You know, I couldn't see what had already passed by. I had no idea what was coming next. But my father, being a little taller than me, he could see everything, those things that had already passed by and the things in the parade that were yet to come. So if I had one message to all of us today is, can I just remind you that there is a sovereign God who sees the whole parade. He knows what's already passed by. He knows what's still yet to come. And he knows the ending of all this. He knows the end of our stories. And so maybe we can take a little bit of comfort in the fact that there's somebody bigger than us that's in charge and in control. And he sees the whole parade.
Scott, I certainly appreciate you coming on the podcast today. We'll put a link to North Star inside the show notes here below, friends. What I've heard today is this. Here's what I've heard today, is that we're not in control. Somebody else is. There is hope in the midst of turmoil. We can look outside of our circumstances as we look at others and the opportunity to help them. We were created for relationships. Man, that's the truth. I'm tired of being in isolation, candidly, and I'm an introvert. I mean, I can only handle so much of this, friends. I was even watching Roomba run around. We call him Rhonda in our house. She was running around cleaning the carpet, right? I've even had enough of that. But I've heard some perspective, you know. There's always somebody who has it worse than we are. And so we have the opportunity to serve people. We have the opportunity to love people. And I know it's a little different podcast than normal. Yeah, normally we're talking about law, or we're talking about money, or we're talking about, you know, different things as it relates to banking, et cetera. But after so much hopelessness, so much fear, genuine heartfelt fear, I wanted to reach out to a man that I knew could bring some perspective and to bring some hope. And Scott, you certainly did that today, buddy. I appreciate you coming on the podcast. I really do.
It is my pleasure, Justin.
So friends, like we say every week, we realize that life is hard. It is. Life can be frustrating, but life is good. Life is good. Like I told you the other day, the sun will rise tomorrow just like it did today, barring the Lord's return. It will be up. Life is still good. Look, I realize life is frustrating. Money doesn't have to be. We're going to continue to make our lives at least financially simple. Like I say every week, y'all go out and make it a great day. It's not going to happen unless you intentionally do it. Y'all take care.